Welcome back to Sleep Storyteller, where every night is a new adventure, and every story is a journey into the unknown. I'm so glad you're here, ready to relax, unwind, and let the gentle sound of rain guide you into a peaceful slumber. As we begin tonight's story, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the world outside fade away. Remember, this is your space, a place to let go, to dream, and to find the calm you need. If you're ready for tonight's story, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing what helps you relax most at night. Now, let's begin. The rise of the Moonlit Queen, in the distant lands of Valeria, where the winds whispered of ancient secrets and the stars above told tales of forgotten heroes, there lay a kingdom of untold beauty. It was a land where the mountains kissed the heavens and the rivers glistened like strands of silver beneath the moonlight. The people who lived here were kind and their hearts pure, living in harmony with the land. They believed in the magic of the moon, a gentle force that watched over them as they slumbered, casting dreams filled with peace and love. In the heart of this kingdom stood a magnificent castle, its towers rising high into the sky, crowned with the soft glow of the moon. It was a place of peace and beauty, a sanctuary where all who entered were greeted with warmth and tranquility. And within this castle, there lived a princess. Her name was Aliana, and she was unlike any other. Aliana had always been a curious soul, her heart restless, always yearning for something more. From a young age, she had been drawn to the moon, to the mysterious pull that seemed to guide her steps, her thoughts, and her dreams. She would often wander through the royal gardens late at night, her eyes lifting to the glowing orb in the sky, seeking answers to questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Her mother, Queen Leora, had often spoken to her of the moon's power, the way it had watched over their family for generations, granting them peace and prosperity. But even her mother, wise and graceful as she was, could not answer the questions that haunted Aliana's heart. On one such night, as the moon hung full and bright in the sky, Aliana ventured into the garden as she had many times before. The night air was cool against her skin, and the soft rustling of leaves was the only sound that broke the silence. She walked along the stone path that wound through the lush greenery, her steps slow and thoughtful. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft, ethereal glow, casting long shadows and making the flowers and trees shimmer as though they were alive with magic. As Aliana reached the edge of the garden, where the trees parted to reveal a small clearing, she paused. There, standing in the center of the clearing, was a figure that seemed to glow with the same soft light as the moon itself. Aliana's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, drawn to the figure with an inexplicable force. It was a woman, tall and regal, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of light. Her eyes shone with a soft, knowing light, as though she had witnessed the rise and fall of countless moons, yet she seemed ageless, as if time itself could not touch her. "You seek something, child," the woman said, her voice a melody that seemed to echo in the very air. "Do you not?" Aliana nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen this woman before, yet there was something familiar about her. Something she couldn't quite place. "I seek answers," Aliana whispered, her voice trembling. "I have always felt that I am meant for something more. Something beyond the life I live here in the palace. I cannot explain it, but the moon, it calls to me." The woman smiled, a soft and knowing smile that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. She stepped forward, her feet making no sound as she moved. The air around her shimmered, and the night seemed to grow still, as though the very world was waiting for what would come next. "The moon does indeed call to you, Princess Eliana," the woman said, her voice soft but powerful. "You are the chosen one, the one whose destiny is intertwined with the rise of the Moonlit Queen. The moon has guided your path for a reason, and it is time for you to step into the light it offers." Eliana felt a chill run down her spine, though the night was warm. "The Moonlit Queen," she echoed, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" "I am just a princess." The woman shook her head gently, her silver hair flowing like water. "No, child. You are far more than a princess. The time has come for you to embrace the power that resides within you. The moon has chosen you to be its queen, to bring balance and peace to the world, to guide it through the coming darkness." Eliana took a step back, her mind spinning. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I am just one person." "How could I? You have always been more than you know," the woman interrupted gently. "The moon's power runs through your blood, just as it runs through the blood of your ancestors. You are not alone in this. The moon will guide you, and the stars will watch over you. But the choice is yours, Eliana. Will you accept the destiny that calls to you? Will you rise as the Moonlit Queen?" Eliana stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. The weight of the woman's words pressed heavily upon her. She had always known there was something more to her existence. Something greater than the life she had known in the palace. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The woman reached out a hand, her fingers glowing with the soft light of the moon. "Do not fear what you are meant to be, princess. The moon has waited for you. Now, it is time for you to rise." Eliana looked up at the woman, her eyes wide with uncertainty and wonder. Could it be true? Could she truly be the one destined to rule, to guide her people through a time of darkness? With a deep breath, she stepped forward, reaching out to take the woman's hand. The moment their fingers touched, a surge of energy coursed through her, filling her with warmth and light. The moon's power wrapped around her like a cloak, a comforting presence that whispered of things yet to come. As the light of the moon grew brighter, Eliana felt a deep, unshakable certainty fill her heart. This was her destiny. The Moonlit Queen was not just a title, it was a calling. And she was ready to rise. The moonlight enveloped Eliana like a soft, glowing veil, wrapping her in its embrace as if it had always belonged to her. Her heart raced with the newfound power flowing through her veins, and yet, amidst the overwhelming sensation, there was a strange calmness, a serenity that came from knowing that this was where she was always meant to be. The silver-haired woman, still standing before her, smiled kindly, her gaze filled with ancient wisdom. "You have felt it, haven't you?" the woman asked, her voice soothing as a gentle breeze. "The calling. The power that lies within you. It is the moon's gift, but also a great responsibility. You will not walk this path alone, Eliana. The moon has always been with you, and now it will guide you." Eliana nodded slowly, still trying to comprehend what had just transpired. She had always felt a connection to the moon, but this felt different. The world around her seemed to shimmer with new possibilities, the air heavy with the weight of destiny. She felt as though the entire kingdom, the very earth beneath her feet, was watching her, waiting for her next move. "Who are you?" Eliana asked, her voice trembling. "What is your role in this? Why have you come to me?" The woman's smile deepened, and she took a step closer. "I am Lysandra, a servant of the moon, an ancient guide who has watched over many generations of rulers before you. I was once a queen, just as you are destined to be. But my time has passed, and now it is your turn to take the mantle. The moon has chosen you to lead, to protect your people, and to bring balance in a time when shadows begin to stir." Eliana's brow furrowed with confusion. "But the kingdom is at peace," she said softly. "We have lived without war for as long as I can remember." "What do you mean by shadows stirring?" Lysandra's expression darkened, her silver hair fluttering slightly as if caught by a breeze that wasn't there. "Eliana, peace is but a fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of time. Darkness is always lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. There are forces in this world, forces that seek to bend the light to their will, to use it for their own twisted purposes. The moon has always protected the kingdom, but now, it is your turn to wield its light." Eliana took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Lysandra's words settle deep within her heart. The idea of war, of darkness creeping into her peaceful world, was unsettling, but she could not deny the truth in Lysandra's voice. She had always known, deep down, that peace was fragile. No kingdom, no matter how prosperous, was immune to the tides of fate. "So, what must I do?" Eliana asked, her voice barely a whisper. The magnitude of the situation was beginning to sink in, and with it came the overwhelming realization that her life would never be the same. She could no longer walk the path of a simple princess. She had a higher calling, and with it came duties she had never imagined. Lysandra nodded approvingly, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You must first understand the power that the moon has given you. It is not a force to be taken lightly. The moon's light is both gentle and fierce, a balance that must be maintained. There are those who would use the light for their own selfish desires, and it is your duty to ensure that the balance is kept." Eliana felt the power within her stir, a subtle warmth that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. It was a presence that had always been with her, though she had never truly understood it. Now, she could feel it more clearly, like a flame that had just been lit within her chest, flickering with a promise of something greater. Lysandra continued, "In the coming days, you will be tested. There will be trials that will challenge your heart, your mind, and your very soul. But through it all, you must remain true to yourself and to the moon's light. Your people are depending on you. The moon's guidance will never falter, but you must learn to trust it, just as you must trust yourself." Eliana looked up at the sky, her gaze shifting to the brilliant orb above, the moon that had always watched over her. It now seemed so much more than a glowing rock in the sky. It was a living presence, a silent guardian, a guide that had been waiting for her to step forward, to embrace her destiny. "I will do whatever it takes," Eliana said, her voice steady and resolute. She felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, as though the very air around her had shifted, aligning with the quiet strength that was awakening inside her. She had never asked for this responsibility, never imagined that she would one day rule, but she could not deny the calling. It was as though every fiber of her being had been leading her to this moment. Lysandra smiled again, her silver hair glowing brighter in the moonlight. "You are ready, Aliana. The moon has chosen you, and so it shall be." With those words, Lysandra extended her hand once more, this time offering Aliana a small silver pendant that hung from a delicate chain. The pendant was shaped like a crescent moon, its surface smooth and polished, glowing softly with the same ethereal light as Lysandra herself. "This is a symbol of your bond with the moon," Lysandra explained. "It will guide you in times of doubt, and protect you when you face the darkness that lies ahead. Keep it close, for it is a part of you now." Aliana took the pendant, feeling a strange warmth spread through her fingertips as she clasped it in her palm. She could sense the magic embedded within the silver, a magic that resonated with the very core of her being. "Thank you," Aliana whispered, the weight of her responsibility settling into her heart like a gentle, but unshakable force. Lysandra stepped back, her figure beginning to fade into the moonlight, her presence dissolving like mist in the air. "Remember, princess," she said, her voice echoing softly in the still night. "The rise of the Moonlit Queen is not just the rise of a ruler. It is the rise of a protector, a beacon of light in a world that often forgets the value of peace. Trust in the moon, and trust in yourself. You will find your way." And with that, Lysandra was gone, leaving only the soft glow of the moon and the quiet whisper of the wind to fill the air. Aliana stood alone in the clearing, the pendant warm in her hand, her heart filled with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. The path ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. The Moonlit Queen had risen, and with her, a new chapter in the kingdom's story had begun. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity. Aliana spent her mornings walking through the palace gardens, her thoughts often drifting to the words of Lysandra. The weight of her new role, the power that now stirred within her, was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She had always been a princess, surrounded by tutors and scholars, growing up with the knowledge of courtly politics and diplomacy. But this was different. This was not the life she had envisioned. The moonlight, however, was always there to guide her. Each night, as the pale glow bathed the land, she felt the power of the moon wash over her like a wave, filling her with an unfamiliar sense of strength and calm. It was as though her soul had been woven with the fabric of the night sky itself, and every whisper of the wind, every rustling of the trees, seemed to carry the wisdom of ages. One evening, as Aliana stood at the edge of the palace balcony, gazing out at the moon hanging high above the kingdom, she felt a sudden pull, a subtle tug at her heart. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain, but it called her, urging her to follow. She had learned to trust these instincts, for they had never led her astray. Without hesitation, she turned and hurried down the grand staircase, her footsteps light and swift as she made her way through the winding corridors of the palace. The castle was silent at this hour, its halls empty, save for the quiet murmur of the night. She reached the grand doors and stepped outside, where the air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of flowers in bloom. The moon was full tonight, its light casting long shadows across the courtyard. Aliana felt a shiver run down her spine as she walked into the center of the open space. There, in the heart of the garden, stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its branches stretching toward the sky like the hands of a giant. Beneath it, the grass grew thick and lush, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. The moment Eliana stepped closer, the earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with energy. She stopped, feeling the pull growing stronger, as though the very earth itself was calling to her. It was then that she saw it, a faint silver light flickering at the base of the tree, hidden beneath the thick roots. Eliana knelt down, brushing away the leaves and dirt that had gathered there over the centuries. Her fingers grazed something smooth and cool to the touch. With a gentle tug, she pulled a small, intricately carved box from the earth. It was made of dark wood, the surface etched with delicate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. The box was heavy, its weight far greater than she expected, as if it contained something far more precious than she could comprehend. Eliana's heart pounded in her chest as she carefully lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled within a bed of velvet, lay a small silver crown. The metal gleamed softly, almost as though it had been shaped from the moonlight itself. Its design was simple yet elegant. 7 delicate points radiated outward, each tipped with a faint glimmer of gemstone that caught the light with every movement. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as she touched the crown. The moment her skin made contact with the metal, a surge of warmth rushed through her, filling her with a sense of purpose and understanding. It was as though the crown had always been meant for her, as if it had waited for this moment, this connection, to come to life. Eliana lifted the crown from the box, feeling its weight settle in her hands. She held it up, studying the shimmering stones embedded in its structure. Each gem seemed to hum with a faint energy, and she could almost hear the whispers of ancient voices, telling her stories of the kingdom and the moon's protection over the land. "This is my legacy," Eliana whispered, her voice soft but filled with conviction. She understood now, the crown was not merely a symbol of power. It was a connection to the moon's light, to the magic that flowed through her veins. It was a promise that she would protect her people, that she would stand as their beacon in times of darkness. Eliana carefully placed the crown upon her head, feeling the cool metal rest gently against her brow. As soon as it settled, a wave of energy surged through her, stronger than anything she had ever felt. The air around her seemed to shimmer with light, and for a brief moment, she felt as though she was one with the moon itself. The world around her faded, leaving only the crown and its connection to the light above. But just as quickly as the feeling had come, it faded, leaving Eliana standing beneath the oak tree, her heart racing with the realization of what she had just experienced. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked out over the kingdom that lay before her. The moon's light bathed the land, casting everything in a silver glow, but deep within her, Eliana knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to learn, many trials to face, but she was no longer the frightened princess she had once been. She was the Moonlit Queen, chosen by the very forces of the night to lead her people. And with the crown upon her head, she felt ready. Eliana stood there for a long while, the crown still resting gently on her head, the moonlight around her growing ever brighter. The path ahead would not be easy, and there would be challenges she could not yet foresee. But she knew, deep within her, that she would not face them alone. The moon was with her, and always would be. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, but Eliana found herself grounded in a way he had never experienced before. The crown, still resting upon her brow, had not only changed her outward appearance but had shifted something deep within her, a sense of purpose, a certainty that she had never known. With each passing hour, she felt the moon's light guide her actions, and the once overwhelming weight of responsibility seemed to settle more naturally upon her shoulders. Despite the serenity that now enveloped her, Aliana was keenly aware that the road ahead was fraught with challenges. Lysandra's words echoed in her mind, "There will be trials that will challenge your heart, your mind, and your very soul." But as she stood in the palace courtyard one crisp evening, the moon hanging full and bright above, she felt an unfamiliar sense of readiness. The moon had granted her its strength, and she would not falter. As the days turned into weeks, Aliana began to meet with her advisors, learning the complexities of leadership in ways she had never anticipated. Her kingdom, though peaceful, was not without its hidden tensions. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the distant corners of the land, and rumors of strange occurrences in the nearby forests began to reach her ears. Some spoke of creatures in the woods, dark beings that thrived in the absence of light. Others spoke of a shadow rising from the east, a force gathering strength under the cover of night. Aliana listened carefully to every report. But her heart remained steady. She trusted in the guidance of the moon, and in the crown that now crowned her as its chosen. Yet, she knew that not all of her people would accept her reign easily. Some would resist. Some would doubt. And some might even wish to see her fall. Her first test came sooner than expected. It was late one evening, as the full moon began to rise, casting its silver glow across the land, that Aliana was summoned to the royal chambers. Her mother, Queen Seraphina, had called for an urgent council meeting. The atmosphere in the room was tense as Aliana entered, greeted by the familiar faces of her advisors. But there was one face among them that Aliana had not seen in a long time. King Alaric, her father, stood at the head of the table, his broad frame silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the window. His face was set in a grim expression, his eyes clouded with worry. "Father?" Aliana asked softly, her voice hesitant. King Alaric glanced up at her, his gaze weary. He seemed older, his once sharp features now softened with age. The years of ruling had left their mark, and Aliana knew the weight of his crown had begun to bear heavily upon him. But there was something more, a shadow of fear in his eyes. "Aliana," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, "there is trouble on the horizon. The rumors are true. A force from the east is rising, and it is unlike anything we have faced before." Aliana's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the whispers of darkness growing in the east, but she had not expected it to reach the royal council so soon. She took a seat at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. "What kind of force?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "And why have we not acted sooner?" Her mother, Queen Seraphina, looked at her with a mixture of concern and pride. "The force is a shadow, Aliana. A power that we thought had been long vanquished, but it seems to have resurfaced in the farthest corners of the kingdom. The darkness is spreading, and we fear it may be only a matter of time before it reaches the heart of our lands." King Alaric nodded solemnly. "The darkness is not just a mere enemy. It is an ancient evil, one that has long sought to destroy the light. We have heard of strange creatures, beasts of shadow, emerging from the eastern forests. And there have been reports of villages disappearing, swallowed whole by the night, Aliana felt the chill of dread settle in her bones. This was what Lysandra had warned her about. The darkness was real, and it was coming. She could feel the pull of the moon, as if it too was preparing for the battle that lay ahead. "We must act swiftly," Aliana said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded with uncertainty. "I will take the moon's light and guide us to victory. I will not allow the darkness to overtake our kingdom." Her mother smiled faintly, but it was clear that even she had doubts. "Aliana, you are still young. You have the power of the moon within you, but this is a force unlike any we have encountered before. We cannot simply rush into this battle without understanding the true nature of the enemy." Aliana's eyes met her father's, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. He had always been a strong leader, a king who had protected the kingdom with his life. But now, he seemed uncertain, as though the battle ahead would be more than even he could handle. "We have trained for this," Aliana said softly, her voice calm but firm. "I have the strength of the moon behind me. I will not let this kingdom fall." The council fell into a heavy silence. All eyes were on her. Her mother and father, though hesitant, knew there was no turning back now. They had raised Aliana to be a leader, to carry the crown with honor. And though they were reluctant to let her face the coming darkness, they knew she had the heart of a queen. "We will stand with you, my daughter," her mother said quietly, her voice laced with both pride and fear. Aliana nodded, her resolve hardening. "We will fight together. The moon will guide us. And we will not falter." With the weight of her newfound responsibility heavy on her shoulders, Aliana stood from the table, her eyes lifting to the window where the moon hung high in the sky. Its light shone brighter now, casting a silver glow over the kingdom. And in that light, she felt an undeniable connection, a bond with something greater than herself. She was not just a queen. She was the protector of the light. And she would defend it with all her strength. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Aliana was no longer the unsure princess she had once been. She was the Moonlit Queen, and the darkness would not take her kingdom without a fight. The days leading up to the confrontation with the rising darkness were filled with preparation and strategy. The kingdom, once calm and serene, now buzzed with an energy that Aliana had never seen before. The streets, usually peaceful, were filled with soldiers, their armor glinting in the daylight as they trained and prepared. Her father, King Alaric, had called upon the kingdom's finest generals to organize defenses, while her mother, Queen Seraphina, oversaw the provisioning of food and supplies. Aliana, however, had little time to focus on the practicalities of the war. Her nights were spent beneath the moon, meditating, seeking guidance in its light. The crown on her brow was more than just a symbol, it was a conduit, a link to the moon's power, and every time she wore it, she felt herself growing stronger. The connection she shared with the night sky deepened, and she began to sense the faint stirrings of something more ancient within her. The moon had granted her strength, but it had also given her a responsibility. She had to learn to wield this power, to trust it completely. One evening, as the moon rose full and bright in the sky, Aliana stood on the balcony of the royal palace, gazing out over the kingdom. The light of the moon bathed the land, casting long shadows across the plains and hills. The kingdom stretched out beneath her, peaceful yet shadowed by the growing darkness to the east. She had been reflecting on her conversation with her parents earlier that day, when they had expressed their concerns about her readiness. They feared for her safety, but more than that, they feared for the kingdom. They had lived through times of war. But this was something different. Aliena knew they saw the same fear in her eyes that had clouded her father's in the council room, but tonight, as she stood under the moon's soft gaze, Aliena felt something shift within her. She was no longer afraid. The weight of the crown, which once felt too heavy for her, now seemed to fit perfectly. The moonlight wrapped around her like a cloak of protection, its radiance infusing her with a sense of power and purpose. With a deep breath, Aliena stepped away from the balcony and walked toward the heart of the castle. She had made her decision. It was time to face the darkness head-on. She would not sit idly by while her kingdom was threatened. She had been chosen for this moment, and it was time to embrace that destiny. As she entered the royal chambers, she found Lysandra waiting for her. The ancient sorceress stood near the hearth, her long, silver hair shimmering in the dim light of the candles. Her eyes, though ancient, still held the sharpness of one who had seen the world's hidden truths. Lysandra, Aliena greeted her, her voice steady. The sorceress turned, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "You have made your decision, I see," Aliena nodded. "I cannot wait any longer. The darkness is real, and it is drawing closer. I must face it." Lysandra studied her for a moment, her gaze intense. "You are ready, Aliena. The moon has prepared you, but remember this: darkness is not always what it seems. It can take many forms, and it may not be as easily defeated as you think." Aliena stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I understand. But I cannot allow this shadow to consume my kingdom. I will fight, Lysandra. With the strength of the moon behind me, I will protect the light." The sorceress nodded slowly, then moved toward the table where a collection of scrolls and ancient maps lay. She unfurled one, revealing a detailed map of the kingdom's eastern borders, where the darkness was said to be growing. "The darkness is not just a force of evil," Lysandra explained, her finger tracing the map. "It is a living thing. A presence that feeds on fear and doubt, and it is said to be led by one who commands shadows themselves." Aliena leaned in, her brow furrowing. "A leader of shadows? Who is this person?" Lysandra's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "We do not know. There are whispers, rumors that the leader is a creature of ancient origin, one whose heart was blackened long ago by the very darkness they command. Some say they are immortal, cursed to live for eternity, feeding off the despair they sow." Aliena felt a cold shiver run through her. The thought of facing such an ancient, powerful being sent a ripple of doubt through her, but she pushed it away. She had to be strong, for her people, for the kingdom. The moon would guide her. "We will gather the army tomorrow," Aliena said, her voice firm. "We will move at dawn. The moon will be our ally in this battle." Lysandra gave a small nod, but there was an underlying sadness in her expression. "Be careful, Aliena. The darkness will test you in ways you cannot yet understand. You may think you are fighting a physical enemy, but remember this: sometimes the greatest battles are the ones fought within." With those cryptic words, the sorceress turned and began gathering her things. Aliena stood in silence for a moment, contemplating Lysandra's words. The greatest battles were the ones fought within. She turned and left the room, her mind swirling with the weight of the coming battle. She was not just facing an external force, she was also confronting the fears and uncertainties within herself. The crown on her head, the light of the moon, it was all more than a gift. It was a challenge. A challenge to be the leader her people needed, to face her own doubts, and to step into the role that the moon had carved out for her. The night stretched on, but Eliana did not sleep. Instead, she stood in the royal garden, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The wind whispered through the trees, and the stars above seemed to twinkle with silent encouragement. She was ready. The kingdom's future rested in her hands. But more than that, her own destiny was about to unfold. And with the moon's light to guide her, she would rise, stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever before. The morning arrived, gray clouds hanging low over the kingdom, as though even the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. The soldiers were ready, their armor shining with the light of determination, and the kingdom's leaders gathered in the courtyard, awaiting the Moonlit Queen's command. Eliana stood before them, the crown resting upon her brow, its weight no longer heavy but empowering. The moonlight, though hidden behind the clouds, seemed to pulse from within her, filling her with a calm certainty. She was no longer the uncertain princess who had walked into the royal council months ago. She had become something else. A beacon for her people, a symbol of the strength of the light in the face of encroaching darkness. At her side stood Lysandra, her face solemn as ever, but with an air of quiet approval. "You are ready, my queen," the ancient sorceress said, her voice soft but firm. Eliana nodded. "The moon guides me," she said simply, though her heart still raced. She was no stranger to battle, but this felt different. The air seemed thick with anticipation, the land holding its breath in the wake of what was to come. Behind her, King Alaric and Queen Seraphina stood with worried expressions. Despite their quiet pride, they could not hide the concern in their eyes. This was not a battle they had prepared their daughter for. This was a fight against something older, darker, and more powerful than anything the kingdom had ever faced. But there was no turning back now. Eliana turned toward the eastern gates, where the army had gathered in ranks. The horizon was still dark, with the first light of dawn barely piercing the sky. The land to the east, once lush and peaceful, was now an area of growing concern. Whispers of the shadow growing there had reached the palace months ago, and now Eliana knew the time had come to confront it. The moon had been her guide for so long, and it would be with her as she ventured into the unknown. "Soldiers of the kingdom," Eliana began, her voice steady, echoing across the courtyard. "We march not only to defend our land but to protect the light. The darkness that rises in the east threatens to swallow everything we hold dear. But as long as the moon shines above us, we will stand firm. We are the protectors of the light. We are the guardians of the kingdom." A murmur ran through the soldiers, a ripple of resolve that spread like wildfire. Eliana felt her own confidence grow as she spoke. She was not alone. The moonlight, the soldiers, her parents, this was her strength, and with it, she would not falter. Her gaze swept over the faces of her people, and for the first time, she saw a true unity in their eyes. The kingdom was with her, and together, they would face the coming storm. With a sharp gesture, Eliana signaled the start of the march. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the soldiers as they began to move in unison. Their steps like a heartbeat that echoed through the land. Eliana led the charge, her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. The moon may have been obscured by the clouds, but she could feel its presence guiding her, lighting the path ahead. The journey to the east took several days, and during that time, Eliana meditated beneath the stars each night, drawing strength from the moon's glow. It was on the third evening, as the army set up camp in a clearing, that she felt the first stirrings of something else, something darker. It came as a whisper on the wind, a chill that ran down her spine despite the warm night air. There was something waiting for them. Something ancient, something that had been lying in wait for centuries. The darkness was no longer just a distant threat. It was here. And it was watching. Lysandra, who had been standing silently beside her, placed a hand on Eliana's shoulder. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked softly. Eliana nodded, her eyes narrowing. "It's here, isn't it?" The shadow, Lysandra's face was grim. "Yes. It is not far now. The creature that leads it, the one they call the Shadowbinder, has awakened. We must be prepared for anything. The battle ahead will test you in ways you cannot imagine." Eliana took a deep breath. The shadow was no longer a mere legend or a distant threat. It was tangible now, real, and it was coming for them. But she was no longer afraid. The moon's light burned bright within her, and she would not let the darkness claim her kingdom. That night, as the soldiers rested in the quiet of the forest, Eliana made her way to a small rise just outside the camp. The moon was partially obscured by the clouds, but there was still enough light to guide her steps. She closed her eyes and reached out, allowing herself to feel the pull of the moon, its power flowing through her. It was a connection she had come to rely on, and in moments like these, it gave her strength. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the forest, but also the faintest trace of something else, a cold, heavy presence. Eliana opened her eyes and looked out toward the horizon. Her gaze fixed on the distant hills. The darkness was approaching, but so, too, was the light. She turned back toward the camp, her heart full of purpose. Tomorrow, the kingdom would face the Shadowbinder. And with the moon's guidance, Eliana would lead her people to victory. The darkness might be rising, but Eliana knew one thing for certain: the moon would never allow the light to fade. The next morning, the air was thick with anticipation, the once peaceful sounds of nature now replaced with the sharp, purposeful movements of soldiers preparing for battle. Eliana stood at the front of the camp, her gaze focused on the eastern horizon, where the shadow had taken root. She felt the weight of her crown more than ever. But it was not a burden. It was a mantle, one that she would carry with grace, for the light of the moon was with her. Lysandra had prepared her well. The ancient sorceress had taught her the ways of the moon's magic, imparting knowledge that stretched far back into the mists of time. But even Lysandra's wisdom could not predict what lay ahead. The enemy they faced was no ordinary force. It was something ancient, something that thrived on the very fears of those who encountered it. The Shadowbinder was a being of the void, a creature born of shadows and silence, whose very presence could suffocate the spirit. Eliana could feel the pull of it. The darkness was close now, closer than ever. The army was ready, but it was not just their swords and shields that would protect them. It was the strength of their will, the unity of the kingdom, and the power of the moon that would be their true weapons. She turned to face her generals, each one a seasoned warrior in their own right. "Today, we march to face the Shadowbinder," she said, her voice unwavering. "We will not falter. We will not be consumed by fear. We march to protect our people, our land, and our light. We are the keepers of the moon, and as long as we stand, the darkness will never win." Her words were met with a fierce cheer, and the soldiers began to form ranks, their faces set in determination. Eliana could feel the strength of her army, a force of nature bound by their belief in her. It was a power she had never experienced before, the weight of so many lives depending on her, but she would not let them down. She had been chosen for this moment, and she would rise to the challenge. The army marched toward the eastern edge of the kingdom, the landscape growing darker and more foreboding with every step. The land, once lush and vibrant, was now scarred by the presence of the Shadowbinder. The trees were twisted, their limbs contorted as if they had been pulled into unnatural shapes, their leaves withered and blackened. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and the closer they got to the source of the darkness, the more the kingdom seemed to fade away. It wasn't long before they reached the edge of the blighted land. Eliana paused, her breath catching in her throat. The land before them was empty, barren, as though it had been drained of all life. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming silence that pressed in on them from all sides. Lysandra approached her, her face grim. "The Shadowbinder is near," she said quietly. "Be prepared, Eliana. What you are about to face is not just a battle of strength. It is a battle of wills. The darkness will try to twist your mind, to make you doubt everything you know. You must resist it." Eliana nodded, her heart steady. She had faced fear before, but this was different. The Shadowbinder was not just an enemy, it was a force of pure malevolence, an entity that could unravel the very fabric of one's thoughts and dreams. But she was ready. The moon was her ally, and with it, she would stand firm. As they ventured deeper into the land, the shadows seemed to grow thicker, clinging to the air like a tangible fog. The soldiers kept close, their eyes scanning the surroundings, but Eliana could sense the unease spreading among them. They had never encountered anything like this before. The fear was palpable. Then, out of the silence, a voice echoed through the air. It was low and haunting, like the whisper of the wind through dead trees. "So, the Moonlit Queen has come," the voice said, reverberating through the very earth beneath their feet. "How brave! How foolish!" Eliana's heart skipped a beat, but she did not show fear. She lifted her chin and called into the darkness. "I am not here to cower in the face of shadows," she declared. "I am here to banish you. The moon will shine once more, and you will fade into nothing." A long, chilling laugh answered her, and the shadows seemed to pulse and writhe in response. From within the darkness, a figure emerged, tall and cloaked in swirling blackness. Its face was obscured, but its presence was overwhelming. Its mere existence seemed to drain the very light around it. The Shadowbinder, it was as though the very essence of the void had taken form, a being born from the deepest corners of the universe, where light dared not go. Eliana could feel the weight of its power pressing against her, but she stood tall, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The moonlight still flowed within her, steady and constant, and she drew strength from it. "You are foolish to think you can defeat me, Moonlit Queen," the Shadowbinder said, its voice a caress of death itself. "I have lived longer than you can imagine, and I have consumed worlds in the shadow of my wake. The light will falter, and you will fall." Aliana's heart pounded in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "The light may falter, but it will never fade. I am the moon's chosen. I will not let you turn this kingdom into a shadow of what it once was." The Shadowbinder's laughter echoed once more, but Aliana's resolve did not waver. She could feel the pull of the darkness, but she also felt the moon's light growing within her, growing stronger, pushing back against the suffocating presence of the Shadowbinder. "This is the moment, Aliana," Lyssandra's voice came from behind her, a whisper in the wind. "Use the moon's light. Let it flow through you. Let it banish the darkness." Aliana closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse of the moon within her. She reached out with her senses, drawing on the light that had always been her guide. Slowly, she raised her hands, calling upon the power of the moon, her voice a soft prayer to the stars. "Moon, grant me your strength," she whispered. "Guide me in this darkness. Let your light shine brighter than ever before." The shadows around her began to recede, pushing back against the tide of moonlight that swirled around her like a beacon. The Shadowbinder snarled, its form writhing in the light, but Aliana was unshaken. The battle had only just begun, and she was ready. The moonlight surged from Aliana, bright and pure, like a silken thread weaving through the fabric of the night. Her heart beat in rhythm with the light, steady and strong. The air crackled around her as the darkness recoiled, the suffocating presence of the Shadowbinder being pushed back inch by inch. But it wasn't over. She could feel the power of the Shadowbinder twisting through the land, battling against the moon's glow in an attempt to claw its way back. The soldiers behind her watched in awe, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They had never seen their queen like this, standing alone before the darkness, yet commanding the very moon itself. Aliana could hear their whispers, soft and reverent, but she did not let herself be distracted. Her focus was fixed on the creature before her, the embodiment of all things twisted and foul. The Shadowbinder's form flickered like smoke, the edges of its being swirling and shifting as though it was struggling to maintain its corporeal state in the face of the relentless moonlight. Its voice came again, deeper now, laced with malice. "You think the light will save you, little queen?" it hissed, its form warping into shapes that were almost human, almost monstrous. "You are nothing against me. I was born in the depths of the void, in the place where light dares not tread. I am the end of all things. Your moonlight is but a flicker before me." Aliana's grip tightened on her sword. She had heard these words before, the whispers of doubt, the threats of inevitability. But she would not falter. She had come too far. Her people depended on her, and the moon would guide her through this darkness. She would not allow it to claim her kingdom. "I am the Moonlit Queen," Aliana said, her voice ringing out with a clarity that carried on the wind. "And I will not let the shadows consume what has been given to me. The moon has guided my people through countless nights. You are but a fleeting shadow, and I will burn you away." The Shadowbinder howled in fury, its form growing larger, the shadows thickening as if trying to choke out the light. Aliana could feel its pull, its attempt to invade her mind, to weaken her resolve. It was trying to sow fear, to make her doubt the strength of the moon's light. But Aliana had no time for doubt. She had faced the darkness before, though not like this, and she had always found a way to push through. With a deep breath, she focused her mind, letting the moon's light wash over her, gathering it into a concentrated force. The beam of light from the moon intensified, growing brighter, more radiant, until the very air shimmered with its power. "Come then," she said, raising her sword high, the light gathering at its tip. "Face me." Face the strength of the moon. The Shadowbinder recoiled, its form twisting and writhing as the moonlight burned away at the edges of its being. But it was not done yet. With a final, ear-piercing shriek, it lunged at Aliana. A wave of darkness crashing toward her like a tidal wave. The shadows pressed in from every side, their cold touch reaching for her throat, her heart, seeking to extinguish the light that burned so brightly within her. But Aliana did not retreat. She stood firm, the light of the moon flaring from within her, expanding in all directions. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself become one with the light, one with the power that surged through her veins. She could feel the shadows, their cold, grasping fingers, but they were nothing compared to the warmth of the moon's embrace. With a cry, Aliana thrust her sword forward, releasing the moonlight in a concentrated blast. The light exploded outward, filling the clearing, burning through the darkness with the force of 1,000 suns. The Shadowbinder screamed in agony, its form beginning to dissolve, its hold on the land weakening. Aliana could feel the struggle within the darkness, the pull of the void trying to draw her in, but she resisted. She stood her ground, the sword in her hand glowing with the power of the moon. The light was unstoppable now, a beacon in the night, and as it engulfed the Shadowbinder, the creature writhed in one last, desperate attempt to survive, but it was too late. The light pierced through its heart, and with a final, deafening cry, the Shadowbinder shattered, its form dissolving into nothingness. Leaving behind only the faintest trace of its presence, as if it had never existed at all. For a long moment, there was silence. The wind had stilled, the trees ceased their restless swaying, and even the soldiers seemed to hold their breath, unsure if it was truly over. Aliana lowered her sword, her chest heaving with exertion. She felt the warmth of the moonlight still surrounding her, a comforting embrace that reminded her of the bond she shared with the heavens above. The light had triumphed. Lysandra stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe and respect. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You have truly risen, Aliana." Aliana smiled faintly, but the weight of the moment was not lost on her. The battle had been won, but the cost had been great. The land still felt heavy with the echoes of the Shadowbinder's presence, and there was much work to be done to heal the kingdom. But for now, they had prevailed. The soldiers, who had remained silent until now, broke into cheers, their voices ringing out across the land. Aliana's heart swelled with pride as she looked upon them. They had faced the darkness together, and now, they were free. Aliana turned toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the clouds. The sun and the moon were both rising, their light blending in the sky, a perfect balance of day and night. It was a sign, one that spoke of new beginnings, of hope, and of the promise that the light would always shine. "Let us return," Aliana said, her voice calm but filled with certainty. The kingdom has been saved. But our journey is far from over. There is much work yet to be done, and so, with the moon guiding her every step, Aliana led her people back to the kingdom, where peace would once again reign. The days following the fall of the Shadowbinder were heavy, filled with both relief and the quiet weight of a hard-won victory. Aliana returned to the heart of the kingdom, where the moonlight still shone brightly over the land, casting its serene glow on the fields, the city walls, and the hearts of its people. The land had been freed from the grip of the Shadowbinder's corruption. But Aliana knew that the path to healing would not be easy. The scars of darkness ran deep, etched into the land and into the hearts of those who had fought. As the sun rose each morning, the people of the kingdom worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been broken, to restore the harmony that had been disrupted. It was a time of great change, a time when everything seemed to shift in the delicate balance between the light and the shadow, but as Aliana walked through the streets, her heart heavy with the weight of the crown, she could not ignore the whispers that followed her. Whispers that spoke of what lay beyond the horizon, of other dark forces that might one day rise again. The Shadowbinder had been vanquished, but there were always more shadows waiting in the wings, more forces lurking in the unknown. Lysandra, ever faithful, walked beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You did what needed to be done, Aliana," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The kingdom is safe. The people are safe. You are their queen, and they love you." But Aliana's mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of the future. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her, the knowledge that she would need to stay vigilant, to protect her people from whatever might come next. The battle against the Shadowbinder had been only one chapter in a much larger story. "There is still much to be done," Aliana replied, her voice low. "The kingdom may be safe now, but I fear the darkness has only been pushed back, not defeated. And there are always others waiting for their chance." Lysandra nodded in understanding. "Then we will be ready. We will stand by your side, as we always have." Aliana glanced at her, offering a faint smile. She knew that her people, her friends, would be there for her. They would fight beside her, as they always had. But there was something else stirring in her heart, something deeper than just the weight of her crown. That night, as the moon rose high in the sky, Aliana stood alone in the castle courtyard, gazing up at the glowing orb that had guided her through the darkest of nights. The moonlight bathed her in its gentle embrace, filling her with both strength and a quiet sadness. She had always known that the moon held power beyond measure, but now she felt it coursing through her veins, like a living force that was both part of her and apart from her. As she stood there, lost in the quiet of the night, a voice broke the silence, a soft whisper carried on the wind, "Aliana." She turned, her heart quickening as she searched the shadows. There, standing at the edge of the courtyard, was a figure cloaked in darkness. A figure she had not seen in many years. It was Arinder, her breath caught in her throat. She had not expected him, not after all this time. Not after the betrayal. Yet there he stood, his silver hair glowing faintly in the moonlight, his eyes as intense as ever. "Arinder," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward, his cloak swirling around him like smoke. His expression was unreadable, his gaze focused on her with a strange mixture of regret and determination. "I have come to offer my apologies," he said softly. "For everything." Aliana's heart clenched at his words. She had never truly forgiven him for his part in the fall of her father, for his betrayal that had almost cost her everything. And yet, as he stood before her now, she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "The weight of years spent in regret. You should not have come here," Aliana replied, her voice cold. "You abandoned us when we needed you most." "I know," Irinder said, his voice filled with sorrow. "And I have spent every day since then trying to find a way to make amends. I failed you, Aliana. I failed the kingdom. But I am not the man I was. I have changed." Aliana looked at him, unsure of how to respond. The pain of the past still lingered, and she could feel it bubbling up inside her. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. It was as if the moon itself was urging her to listen, to hear what he had to say. "You cannot undo the past," Aliana said, her voice softening despite herself. "But you can start anew. If you truly seek redemption, then show me. Show me that you are worthy of my trust again." Irinder's face softened with a quiet relief. "I will. I swear it." Aliana nodded slowly, her heart torn between the past and the future. She could not forget what had happened, but she also knew that forgiveness was not just a gift, it was a choice. And in that moment, she made a choice. She would not let the shadows of betrayal cloud her judgment forever. If Irinder truly sought redemption, she would give him the chance to prove himself. The moon above shone brighter than ever, casting its glow over the courtyard, over the kingdom, and over the queen who had risen to lead them. There was still darkness in the world, still shadows that lingered, but Aliana knew that with the light of the moon on her side, she could face whatever came next, and so, with the first light of dawn breaking through the horizon, Aliana and Irinder stood together, not as enemies, but as allies, ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light illuminating the quiet streets of the kingdom, casting long shadows that stretched across the stone walls of the castle. Aliana stood in the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to creep into the night. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, of revelations and challenges. But through it all, she had remained steadfast, her resolve as unyielding as the moon itself. Irinder's return had shaken her to the core. His presence stirred memories she had buried long ago, the pain of losing her father, the betrayal that had nearly torn her kingdom apart. Yet, despite the bitterness that clung to those memories, there was something else now, something unfamiliar, a fragile hope. Could it be that Irinder had truly changed? Could he be trusted again? She did not know the answer. The pain of the past was still fresh, the scars it had left on her heart deep and raw. But Aliana had never been one to shy away from difficult choices. The moon had guided her through the darkest of nights, and now it seemed to whisper in her ear once more, urging her to take the next step. With a deep breath, Aliana turned away from the horizon and walked toward the castle's main hall. The sounds of the kingdom's life were beginning to stir in the distance, children's laughter, the clatter of carts, the hum of voices in the streets. The world was waking up, just as she was, and she knew that today would mark the beginning of something new. Inside the hall, Lysandra stood by the large wooden table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she scanned the reports that had been brought to her. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink. A reminder of the work that had to be done, even after a victory as significant as the fall of the Shadowbinder. Aliana, Lysandra said without looking up, her voice a soft murmur as she shuffled through the papers. There are still remnants of the Shadowbinder's influence in the outer regions. Villages reporting strange occurrences, crops withering, animals behaving oddly. The land has not fully healed yet. Aliana nodded, stepping closer to her trusted friend. I know. But we will not let this linger. We will rid our kingdom of every last trace of the Shadowbinder's darkness. Lysandra paused, her eyes meeting Aliana's. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, the kind that had kept them both moving forward during the darkest times. And what of Irinder? Aliana hesitated, her mind wandering to the man who had once been her ally, her confidant. Now, he was something different, someone uncertain, someone who had to prove himself all over again. I will give him a chance, Aliana replied softly. But only if he proves that his heart is truly aligned with ours. He has betrayed us once. I will not allow that to happen again. Lysandra gave a small nod of understanding. I trust you, Aliana. But be careful. The past has a way of resurfacing when we least expect it. Aliana smiled faintly, though the weight of her responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. I will be. I have learned that the light of the moon is not always enough. Sometimes, it takes more than just power. It takes trust. And it takes time. Lysandra placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her silent support. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, one that reminded Aliana that she was not alone in this journey. And that, perhaps more than anything, was the strength she needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and planning. The kingdom was slowly recovering, but the echoes of the Shadowbinder's darkness still lingered in the corners of the land. Aliana knew that the task ahead was daunting, but she also knew that it was one she could face, with the help of those who had stood by her side. And then, one evening, just as the moon rose high in the sky, Irinder sought her out. He found her standing in the same courtyard where they had met just days before, the moon casting its glow on the stone beneath her feet. She turned as he approached, her expression unreadable, though her heart quickened at the sight of him. I have thought long and hard about what you said, Irinder began, his voice low and steady. I know I cannot undo the mistakes of my past. But I will spend the rest of my life making amends. I will fight for this kingdom. I will fight for you. Aliana studied him closely, searching his eyes for any sign of deceit, any hint that he was still the man who had betrayed her so long ago. But there was nothing. There was only sincerity. And in that moment, she realized something she had been avoiding for far too long. She was ready to forgive. I believe you, she said softly, her voice filled with an emotion she hadn't expected. But you must understand, Irinder. Redemption is not a simple thing. It will take time. It will take trust. And it will take sacrifice. Irinder nodded, his expression solemn. I understand. And I am willing to do whatever it takes. Eliana studied him for a long moment, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. It was not an easy choice, but it was the right one. There was no turning back now. She had to lead not only with strength, but with compassion for her kingdom, and for those who had once walked by her side. The silence between them stretched for a few heartbeats before Eliana finally spoke again, her voice soft but firm. Then together, we will protect this kingdom, she said. We will stand against the darkness, whatever shape it takes. And we will rebuild. Irinder's face softened, the tension that had filled the air dissipating as if it had never been there at all. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. I will follow you, he said, his voice full of resolve. Until the end. Eliana nodded, her heart still uncertain but filled with a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy. But she knew now that she was not walking it alone. With Irinder, with Lysandra, and with the strength of the moon that would always guide her, she would face whatever trials came next. And so, with the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon, Eliana stood at the edge of her kingdom, ready to lead her people into a new era, one where the light of the moon would shine brighter than ever before. The days stretched on, each one feeling both like a moment and an eternity. The kingdom had started to breathe again, but the wounds of the past were not so easily healed. Eliana, though strong in her resolve, found herself troubled by the weight of the decisions she had made. The moon's light shone as brightly as ever, but its glow seemed to pale against the responsibilities that lay heavy on her heart. She stood at the castle's highest tower, looking out over the vast land she had sworn to protect. The horizon was a canvas of soft purples and golds as dawn broke, the colors swirling in the sky like a dream. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself such moments of reflection. Life had always been full of movement, full of action, but now she could no longer ignore the stillness within her heart. Behind her, the soft steps of someone approaching caught her attention, and she didn't need to turn to know who it was. Irinder's presence had become a familiar weight, both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. I wondered if I might find you here. His voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty, a softness that belied the strength she had come to expect from him. Eliana turned to face him, the breeze tousling her dark hair, making her seem like a figure from the ancient stories, the queen who had risen from the ashes of the past, stronger than ever. She studied Irinder for a moment, watching as he took a step closer. His once imposing presence had been tempered by humility, the weight of his past mistakes now a burden he carried with quiet resolve. You know, I often come here when I need to think, Eliana said, her voice soft yet steady. It's the only place where the noise of the world fades away for a while. Irinder nodded, his eyes reflecting the same thoughts that haunted her. And do you find peace here, Eliana? Or are you as troubled as the rest of us? Eliana sighed, looking out over the land again, her gaze distant. Peace, she repeated softly. It feels like a fleeting thing. We've won many battles. But the true war, the one that lies within our hearts, is far from over. Irinder stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. Eliana, you are not alone in this. I know my past has cast a shadow over your heart, but I want to prove to you that I can stand by your side, not just as a warrior, but as a companion. We both carry the weight of our kingdom's future. We should carry it together. Her heart stuttered in her chest at his words, a sharp pang of both longing and doubt flooding her. The path they had walked had been one of hardship, of betrayal, and now of tentative trust. Could she truly allow herself to be vulnerable again? Could she trust him fully? For a long time, Eliana remained silent. The weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had faced dragons, storms, and the deepest shadows, but nothing had ever felt as difficult as opening herself to this man who had once been her ally, then her enemy, and now, perhaps, her equal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to believe you, Irinder. I want to believe that the man standing before me now is the same one who once turned his back on me. But belief takes time. I understand, Irinder said, his voice steady. And I will wait. I will wait as long as you need me to. I owe you that much, Eliana. Eliana's heart fluttered, and for a brief moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to fully embrace this possibility. But the thought was quickly replaced by the reality that still lingered in the shadows. There was still work to be done. The kingdom was far from healed, and there were forces in the land that threatened to undo everything they had fought for. The silence between them was broken only by the soft sounds of the wind stirring the trees below, the distant chirp of birds welcoming the new day. We must prepare, Eliana said, her voice clear and resolute. The Shadowbinder's influence may have been broken, but there are still remnants of his followers scattered across the kingdom. The darkness lingers, and we cannot afford to grow complacent. Irinder nodded, understanding the gravity in her tone. Then we will prepare. Together. She glanced back at him, her eyes softening just slightly, though the weight of her decision still hung heavy. I cannot promise that it will be easy, she said. But I can promise that I will do whatever it takes to see this kingdom thrive again. And so will I, Irinder replied, his voice firm, his presence reassuring. Eliana took a deep breath, a sense of quiet strength building within her. There were many challenges ahead, but she was no longer alone in facing them. With Irinder by her side, and with the unwavering support of those who believed in her, they could overcome whatever darkness threatened to encroach upon their kingdom. The light of the moon had never seemed so bright as it did now, casting a soft glow over the land and offering a glimpse of the future, a future that was still uncertain, but one that held the promise of hope. As the sun slowly rose on the horizon, Eliana turned away from the tower and began to walk back toward the heart of the castle. The weight of her crown was no longer a burden but a symbol of her strength and resolve. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers to walk, with all the courage and determination she could muster, and as she walked, the moon seemed to smile down upon her, its light gently guiding her steps. Eliana's footsteps echoed in the grand hallways of the castle as she made her way toward the war council room. The castle, which once felt like a place of comfort, now felt more like a looming presence, its walls whispering of old battles and forgotten promises. Each step she took reminded her that she wasn't just a queen, she was a beacon for her people, a symbol of hope, and yet, she still carried the weight of everything that had come before. The flickering torches on the stone walls cast long shadows, and Eliana could feel the coolness of the stone beneath her feet. It was a quiet morning, the kind of silence that settled like a blanket, making her thoughts louder, more pronounced. Her heart still ached from the long night of contemplation, but she knew that the time for self-doubt had passed. There were battles to be fought, battles that would test her resolve like never before. When she reached the council room, the heavy wooden door creaked open under her touch, and she entered, greeted by the gathered faces of her trusted advisors. Irinder, who had stayed by her side through thick and thin, was already seated at the table. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. "Your Majesty," greeted Leora, the eldest of her advisors, her voice filled with warmth but tinged with concern. "We've been waiting for you." Eliana nodded, stepping further into the room. The atmosphere was heavy with expectation. These were the people who had stood with her through the darkest of days. They were loyal, each of them shaped by the trials they had faced. But Eliana knew that loyalty could be both a blessing and a curse. It was one thing to have their support in times of peace, but another entirely to have it when the very fabric of their kingdom was at stake. She sat at the head of the table, her dark eyes scanning the faces of her council. Each one of them carried their own burdens. As the queen, it was her job to bear the heaviest of them all. "We've received troubling news," Irinder spoke first, his tone serious. "Reports from the western border suggest that there are signs of unrest. The Shadowbinder's followers may be regrouping." Eliana's heart tightened. She had hoped that with the fall of the Shadowbinder, the darkness would dissipate, but the world was never so simple. Evil, once left unchecked, had a way of seeping into the cracks and shadows, always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to rise again. "What do we know about their movements?" Eliana asked, her voice steady, though the unease in her chest was undeniable. Leora exchanged a glance with the others before answering. "The border patrols have reported strange sightings, figures in the night, cloaked and silent. There's been no direct attack, but the signs are there, unmarked symbols carved into trees, remnants of rituals near the abandoned ruins. It's as if they're preparing for something." Eliana frowned. It was clear that these weren't mere remnants of a defeated faction. These were people, perhaps even whole groups, still loyal to the Shadowbinder's cause. But why were they regrouping now? And what were they planning? "We must act swiftly," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We cannot afford to wait for them to strike first." Irinder nodded. "I agree. The longer we let this fester, the more difficult it will be to stamp out." Eliana turned her gaze to Leora, who was scribbling notes furiously. "Have we received any word from the northern provinces?" she asked. Leora paused, then looked up, her face grim. "The northern lords have sent word of increased activity in the mountains. There's a rumor circulating that the Shadowbinder's influence stretches farther than we anticipated, and there are whispers of a cult rising in the northern reaches. If we're not careful, we may face an uprising there as well." Eliana felt the weight of the news settle on her chest, pressing down on her as though the very air had thickened. The kingdom she had fought so hard to rebuild was once again teetering on the brink of chaos. "We cannot afford a war on multiple fronts," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We must choose our next steps carefully." Irinder stood and approached the map laid out on the table. His fingers hovered over the regions marked with red ink, areas of unrest. Regions that had yet to fully recover from the years of Shadowbinder's control. we need to send emissaries to the northern lords, he said, his voice low but firm. We can't afford to alienate them. If they believe that we've turned our backs on them, they may join forces with the cult. Aliena nodded. Agreed. And we'll need to send a small reconnaissance force to the western border to assess the threat more thoroughly. I want no surprises. Leora looked up from her notes, her expression thoughtful. Your Majesty, there is also the matter of the Moonlit Order. While we've regained control of the capital, there are still factions within the order that are disillusioned by your ascension. They may not be actively working against you, but they're certainly not offering their support either. The Moonlit Order, once a powerful faction within the kingdom, had been fractured during the war. Many of its members, once devoted to the Shadowbinder's cause, had turned on him in the end, but the scars of their past allegiances still ran deep. Aliena knew that there were some within the order who had never truly accepted her as their queen, and that was a problem that needed to be addressed. She could not afford disunity now, not when their kingdom was vulnerable. I'll speak with their leaders, Aliena said, determination in her eyes. I may not be able to win all of them over, but I will give them the chance to prove their loyalty. The kingdom cannot afford division. There was a pause, and the room fell silent as everyone considered her words. They all knew that this would not be easy. The path forward was fraught with challenges, but Aliena had learned long ago that the path of leadership was never simple. She had faced darkness before, and she would face it again. We have a lot of work ahead of us, she said finally, her voice steady. But we will not falter. This kingdom is worth fighting for, and I will not let it fall into the shadows again. As her words filled the room, a sense of purpose settled over the council. They were united, for now. But Aliena knew that the true test had only just begun. The days that followed were filled with urgency and preparation. Aliena barely had a moment to herself as she made the rounds of the kingdom, ensuring that her orders were being followed, and that her advisors were on the move. News of the potential threats from the western border and the northern provinces had sent ripples through the kingdom. While many rallied behind her, there were those who whispered of their doubts, unsure whether a queen who had risen from the ashes could truly unite a fractured realm. Aliena spent long hours in the war room with Irinder, Leora, and the rest of her council, poring over maps and discussing strategy. It was clear that the kingdom's unity would be tested in the coming days. Each faction, each province, had its own way of thinking, its own set of concerns. But Aliena knew that if she was to stand a chance against the forces that threatened her kingdom, she would need to weave those threads together, to craft a tapestry of strength where none existed. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the castle, Aliena found herself standing at the balcony, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The winds had changed. There was a stillness in the air that spoke of something more than just the passing of time. You seem troubled, Your Majesty. Irinder's voice broke the silence behind her. His tone gentle yet probing. Aliena didn't turn around. I've been thinking about the northern provinces. The northern lords are a proud people. They won't be swayed easily. Irinder moved to stand beside her, his presence a steadying force. You've faced tougher challenges than this. They may not all be loyal to you, but many are. You've earned their respect over the years. It's not too late to win their full allegiance. Aliena sighed, her breath catching in the cool night air. But can I? Can I win over those who still see me as an outsider, someone who was thrust into this role rather than born into it? Irinder placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. You've earned this position, Aliena. Through your actions, your strength, your heart. You may not have been born to it, but you've made it yours. That's what matters. Her eyes glistened with the weight of his words. I hope you're right, Irinder. I hope that when the time comes, they'll stand with me and not against me. The silence between them deepened, but it was not an uncomfortable one. It was a silence that spoke of shared understanding, of two people bound by loyalty and experience, standing on the precipice of an uncertain future. Aliena's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps behind them. The castle steward, a thin man with a permanent furrow to his brow, appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, he said, his voice strained. There's been word from the western border. A small party of soldiers has been sighted near the edge of the mountains. They're gathering, preparing something. The news sent a chill down Aliena's spine. The Shadowbinder's followers, or perhaps those who sought to fill the void he had left, were making their move. She had feared this moment, and now it had come. Gather the council, she ordered, her voice taking on the tone of command that had become second nature to her. We must make our preparations. The steward nodded and rushed off, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Aliena remained at the balcony, her thoughts racing. She knew this was only the beginning. The Shadowbinder's influence might have been shattered, but its remnants had yet to be dealt with. She could feel the pull of destiny, like an invisible thread guiding her forward. But was she truly ready for what lay ahead? Within moments, Irinder and the rest of the council entered the room, their faces grim but resolute. Aliena could see the determination in their eyes. They had fought together before, and they would do so again. We've received word from the western patrols, Irinder began, stepping forward. It seems that the Shadowbinder's followers are regrouping. There's still a small force, but they're rallying around a leader. A woman. No name yet, but they say she has the power to control shadows. Aliena's heart skipped a beat. A woman leading the shadows. It was an unsettling thought. The power to manipulate shadows was dangerous. It was the kind of power that could turn the tides of battle in an instant. How many? Aliena asked, her voice steady but tight with tension. A few dozen at the moment, Irinder replied. But if they're rallying others from the surrounding villages, that number could swell quickly. We cannot afford to underestimate them. Aliena nodded, her mind already calculating their next steps. We need to send a reconnaissance team to gather more information on this leader. Find out who she is, what she wants, and how many people she controls. Leora stepped forward, her expression contemplative. It may be wise to take a more cautious approach. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves prematurely. A small team should suffice for now. But we must remain vigilant. The shadowy remnants of the past have a way of hiding in plain sight. Aliena agreed. Stealth and patience were their allies now. They would need to strike when the time was right, not before. Irinder, you will lead the reconnaissance team. Take only a handful of the most trusted soldiers. Irinder bowed his head. It will be done, Your Majesty. The room was heavy with the weight of their decisions, but Aliana knew there was no turning back now. The threat from the west was real, and it was only a matter of time before they would have to face it head-on. But she would not falter. Not now. Not ever. As the council made their preparations, Aliana stepped away from the balcony, her thoughts turning inward. The path ahead was uncertain, but she had walked through uncertainty before. She had faced the shadows and emerged stronger each time. This time would be no different, but there was something deeper at play. The woman leading the shadows. Aliana could feel it in her bones. The power she wielded was no ordinary magic. It was something ancient, something tied to the very fabric of the kingdom itself. And whatever it was, it would be up to Aliana to confront it, head-on. The Moonlit Queen's journey was far from over, and the night was far from won. But she would rise, as she always had, to meet whatever challenges came her way. The moon hung low in the sky that night, casting a pale silver light across the sprawling city of Erander. The streets were quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of wood as the wind stirred through the trees. Aliana stood at the window of her chamber, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the distant mountains loomed, their peaks veiled in mist. She had always found comfort in the stillness of the night, a time when the world seemed to pause, allowing her to think and reflect. The words of her counsel echoed in her mind. The reconnaissance team was already on its way, led by Irinder. They would infiltrate the western border, gather intelligence, and return with news of the mysterious woman and her followers. But Aliana knew that this task was only the beginning. The true battle was yet to come. A faint knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Without waiting for a response, the door creaked open, and Leora stepped inside. The princess's presence was calming, like a balm to Aliana's restless mind. Her soft footsteps were barely audible as she crossed the room and joined Aliana by the window, restless. Leora asked, her voice gentle yet knowing. Aliana turned, offering a small smile. I'm always restless before a storm. Leora chuckled softly, her golden hair catching the moonlight. The storm is coming, I suppose. We can only prepare as best we can. Aliana nodded. But sometimes preparation is not enough. We don't know what we're truly up against. This leader, this woman who controls the shadows. I can feel that something darker is at play. Leora's expression grew more serious. I've seen what shadows can do. I've lived through it. But you're not alone in this, Aliana. You have your allies, and together, we can face whatever comes. Aliana's eyes softened, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Leora had been with her since the beginning, a steadfast friend and confidant. They had fought side by side, through battles and betrayals, and had come out stronger for it. I don't know what I would do without you, Leora. Leora smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. You do what you've always done. Lead. You've always been more than capable of that. The two women stood in silence for a moment, gazing out at the moonlit city. The soft sound of night creatures filled the air, a gentle reminder that life continued even in the darkest of times. Finally, Aliana broke the silence. We must be prepared for whatever may come. I will not allow this kingdom to fall. Not again. Leora's gaze turned determined, her voice firm. And it won't. You are the Moonlit Queen, Aliana. The people believe in you. We believe in you. Aliana's heart swelled with emotion. She had never truly known what it meant to be loved by her people. But now, standing here with Leora, she felt that bond, that deep sense of unity. It was a feeling she would not take for granted. I won't fail them, Aliana whispered, her voice resolute. As the night stretched on, the two women spoke in hushed tones, discussing strategy and the next steps. But despite their efforts to remain calm, there was an underlying tension in the air. The west was stirring, and they could all sense that a storm was coming, a storm that would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. The following days were a blur of activity as Aliana and her council worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable conflict. Irinder's team had returned with little more than fragmented information. They had encountered scouts from the western border, but the mysterious woman leading the shadows had remained elusive, her presence still shrouded in secrecy, but Aliana knew that the answers were out there. She could feel it in the depths of her soul. She had faced darkness before, and she would face it again, if only to protect the kingdom she had sworn to defend. One morning, as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, Aliana received word from her spies. They had discovered something that could change everything. A hidden encampment near the western mountains. It was a place where the shadowed followers were said to gather. And it was rumored that the woman, the leader, was there. Without hesitation, Aliana gathered her most trusted warriors. Irinder, Leora, and a handful of others, including the skilled archer Farron, would accompany her on this dangerous mission. They would travel under the cover of darkness, infiltrating the camp and gathering any intelligence they could. Are you sure about this, Your Majesty? Irinder asked, his voice cautious but unwavering. Aliana met his gaze with a quiet determination. I must know what we're dealing with. I won't send our people to war blindly. With the decision made, they set out before the sun could rise, slipping into the forest like shadows themselves. The journey was long, and the air grew colder as they moved deeper into the mountains. The terrain was treacherous, and Aliana's muscles ached from the constant strain of moving swiftly and quietly. By the time they reached the hidden encampment, the moon had risen high, casting its pale light over the desolate landscape. They could see the flickering of campfires in the distance, and hear the hushed murmurs of the shadowed followers. But it was not the camp that drew Aliana's attention, it was the figure standing at the center of it, a woman. Tall, regal, and draped in a cloak that seemed to absorb the very light around her. Her eyes gleamed with a darkness that seemed to pulse with life. And her presence was like a weight pressing down on the air itself. Aliana's heart quickened. This was her, the Shadow Queen. They had found her. The air around Aliana seemed to hold its breath as the figure of the Shadow Queen stood before them, her dark cloak swirling like smoke in the moonlight. There was a stillness in the night that sent a shiver down Aliana's spine. This woman, with her ethereal presence, was unlike anything she had encountered before. Her eyes, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to come from the abyss itself, locked onto Eliana with a knowing intensity. Eliana instinctively placed a hand on the hilt of her sword, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her, but also the pull of something deeper, something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The Shadow Queen's gaze seemed to pierce through her, seeing more than Eliana was willing to reveal. "We meet at last," the Shadow Queen spoke, her voice a low, melodic whisper that resonated within the silence of the night. It was not a question, but a statement, as though she had been waiting for this moment for an eternity. Eliana did not speak immediately. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. The woman in front of her was no mere mortal. She was a force, a being of darkness and power. With an aura that seemed to distort the very air around her. "You know who I am," Eliana said, her voice steady despite the unease swirling within her. "And you know why I'm here." The Shadow Queen tilted her head, the faintest smile curving her lips. "Oh, I know more than you think, Eliana of Arander. I've seen your rise, your struggles, and the path that brought you here. You are the one who believes she can save this kingdom, yes?" Eliana's gaze narrowed, her instinct screaming at her to be wary. This was no ordinary enemy. This was someone who had been watching her, studying her every move. But why? What was her true purpose? "I will protect Arander," Eliana declared firmly, her voice unwavering. "And I will not let it fall into the hands of someone like you." The Shadow Queen's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. "You misunderstand me, my queen. I am not here to take what is yours. I am here to offer you something far greater than anything you can imagine." Eliana's brow furrowed in confusion. "What could you possibly offer me? Your darkness has already tainted this land enough." The Shadow Queen's eyes gleamed with a dark light as she took a step forward, the shadows around her seeming to shift and dance in response to her movements. "I offer you freedom, Eliana. The freedom to rise above the constraints of this world, to leave behind the burdens that weigh heavily on your shoulders. Join me, and you will become more than just a queen. You will become the ruler of all, a force that cannot be touched by time or fate." The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on Eliana. She could feel the temptation of them, the allure of power that could take her beyond the limitations of her own mortal existence. But beneath the surface, there was something else, a warning. The promise of darkness was never as simple as it seemed. "You speak of power," Eliana said, her voice now laced with suspicion, "but at what cost? I've seen what happens when people like you offer such things. There is always a price, and it's never worth paying." The Shadow Queen's smile faltered for just a moment. But it quickly returned, more sinister than before. "You are wise to be cautious, Eliana. But you are not in a position to refuse what I offer. Your kingdom is crumbling, your people are divided, and your reign is hanging by a thread. Soon, all that you hold dear will be lost. And then, you will have no choice but to accept the gift I offer." Eliana's heart clenched at the harsh truth in the woman's words. The weight of her kingdom's struggles bore heavily on her, and she had always feared that one day it would slip beyond her control. The shadowed figure before her, with her promises of power and freedom, was right in one regard: Aliana was at a crossroads. The world around her was shifting, and the choices she made now could determine the future of Arander. But there was something else she knew, something deeper than the lure of power. The people of Arander didn't need a ruler who sought to escape the burdens of leadership. They needed someone who would stand by them, even when the world seemed to be against them. "I will not be tempted by your promises," Aliana said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I will never give up on my people, no matter the cost." The Shadow Queen's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing with an unreadable emotion. For a long moment, the two women stood in silence, the tension between them thick enough to be felt in the air. It was as though time itself had paused, waiting for the next move to be made. "You are stronger than I expected, Aliana of Arander," the Shadow Queen said, her voice low and contemplative. "But you are still young, and you still have much to learn." Aliana's gaze never wavered. "I've learned enough to know that there is no quick path to power, no easy answers. I will stand and fight for what is right." The Shadow Queen's smile returned, though it was laced with an edge of something darker. "Very well, Queen. You have made your choice. But know this: our paths will cross again. And when they do, you will be forced to face the consequences of your decisions." With those final words, the Shadow Queen turned, her cloak swirling around her like a shadow made of night. In an instant, she vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but the faintest trace of her presence. Aliana stood alone, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of what had just transpired settled over her like a heavy cloak, but she refused to let fear take root. She had made her choice. She would fight for Arander, and she would protect her people from the shadows that threatened to consume them. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Aliana turned to her companions. Irinder, Leora, and the others had been silent witnesses to the confrontation. They, too, felt the shift in the air, the danger that now loomed over them. "We have work to do," Aliana said, her voice steady, though there was a new fire in her eyes. "We will not let her win. Not now, not ever." And with that, they turned and began their journey back to Arander, ready to face whatever lay ahead.